My care managers have literally taken that disruptive family member out of the home, gone for a walk, had them sign some paperwork, look through things, like whatever it takes. It's kind of like when you have a child whose behavior is acting up, you need to provide them with distraction.
Patients want agency. They want to remain in control of their death, just as they did their life.
Yeah.
And they're going to die the way they live in a lot of ways. And so we have to respect who they were in life and honor them in that way. The objective is to end suffering.
You're listening to Home Care Hindsight, the podcast where we talk with home care leaders about the big mistakes they've made and the even bigger lessons they've learned along the way. I'm David Knack, head of sales here at Zengage, and I've built a career on the idea that we learn a whole lot more from our mistakes than from our successes, which is great because I've made a lot of mistakes. I've gotten to know some of the leaders in this industry who've built amazing businesses and are super well respected. So I thought it'd be fun, instead of asking them about the great things they've accomplished, to have them tell the story of one of the biggest mistakes that they've made and how that mistake changed their thinking and the way they run their business. All right, welcome back to another episode of Home Care Hindsight. This is part 2 of Death and Dying in Home Care. I'm joined once again by Gabby Pumpian and Nicole Soares. Thank you guys so much for coming back on.
Happy to be here.
Happy to be here.
Oh, that was really good. I'll give everybody kind of a quick roadmap of what to expect because we're going to talk about some stuff that I think is probably top of mind for a lot of people. And then we're going to take kind of a left turn, Nicole, into your world, especially in California. And we're going to talk about voluntary stopping eating and drinking and medical aid in dying. This is something that medical aid in dying programs, Nicole, you know more about this than me, but is not available in all 50 states. I live in Arkansas. It is not a thing here, but I think it's really good for people to become aware of because it's available in many more places now than it was 5-10 years ago, and probably will continue to grow as we have more and more seniors, more and more folks with Alzheimer's, dementia, who are finding that they've completed their life. And Nicole, give me the very quick overview of what criteria people hit when they think about like a medical aid in dying program.
Yeah, so just one thing I want to be careful about because it's not available for anyone that does not have capacity, and generally dementia patients lose that capacity to make the decision for themselves. We have that on our wish list for California, and we are pursuing it with End of Life Choices group today. So we hope to get there. But medical aid in dying, or dying with dignity as it's known, are state laws and available in 11 states currently and 1 territory. And each of them might have a little slight difference. But in California, you have to be a California resident. You have to be an adult. You have to have capacity, knowing that you're making this decision for yourself. You have to have a terminal illness that 2 doctors certify that you meet the criteria. They need to certify at least a 48-hour window in between the beginning and ending of the appointment. Those can be done via Zoom or in person, which is lovely. And you have to be able to serve the medication to yourself. So it comes in a powder form. And as a death doula, what I can provide support-wise is to come in and provide ceremony, ritual, help the family and the patient make it a beautiful experience. And I can mix the medication and I can serve it for the ingestion, but the patient has to be able to bring it to their mouth on their own. If they can't orally consume it, it can be inserted through a feeding tube or a rectal insert as well. And they would need to then use the plunger to be able to do the motion to inject that. So that's the basic part of medical aid in dying. The objective is to end suffering. And I will say, not everybody that goes through the process ends up consuming and ingesting. Some of them just like to have it for peace of mind. And if the suffering gets so great, they know they have the option. But it is really interesting to look at the statistics and see that it's like 2/3 actually take it.
So more to come on that. We're going to get a little weird towards the end of this episode. And Nicole, I've really enjoyed our conversation so far about this. As you can tell, I know very little about this world, but I think it's the kind of thing that in this industry need to have conversations about so that when those programs start to show up in our world, that we're not totally caught off guard by that. So anyways, let's get into things today. Last week, we talked about the ways that we can support ourselves and our staffs and then talked about how we can support our caregivers. What I want to talk about this week is how we can be good resources for our clients' family members. There's a lot of stakeholders involved in these kind of end-of-life moments in many cases. And then also how we can support our clients. It's not lost on me that we're kind of getting to clients last. That feels like the last person that we think about when somebody is passing away is the person who's actually doing the dying. That's where we're going to get to it. So I want to kick off the conversation about the kind of family dynamics at play. And Gabby, I want to kind of start with you because I think this is a broader conversation. Every home care agency has had the person swoop in out of nowhere and freak out because they think home care is the wrong solution and they're looking at an assisted living or a memory care or a skilled nursing facility or whatever the case may be. And so talk a little bit about the broader family dynamics in home care and how you see those play out. Obviously, Nicole, this is your world too, as it relates to the particulars of like somebody is near death and how the family dynamics can show up there.
Yeah, thanks, David. So in my many years in home care, I've had the pleasure of having a lot of experiences working with my team and with family members navigating this really delicate and challenging time. And isn't it interesting that often in times of death that people come out of the woodwork, right? That you're like, whoa, who's walking in the home? That's the long lost cousin Bob that nobody's seen in 30 years, but yet here he is, and he's starting to think he has a role in this person's exit in their life. And so family dynamics absolutely tick up. And I believe that it's really important for us as home care professionals to, one, work together with the providers to communicate when we're seeing things in the home that start to create like a red flag gut feeling, whether it's your caregiver, or your care manager or your staffing manager is getting a bunch of calls, or maybe being introduced to a family or somebody coming out of the woodwork and infiltrating into the scene. So communication is number one. If you see something, say something, and starting with the group of professional providers so that everybody's on the same page with what that communication back to the family looks like. The second thing is our job is to make sure that that home environment stays as it should be, which should be an environment of calm and ease and tranquility. And so when someone's coming in, kind of barreling through, starting to look through drawers and maybe like identifying the art that they want and the loved one is still in the bed and they're, in the actively dying process, there's a gentle way I think that the care manager can support the client and the family to ease that person maybe out, take them into the kitchen, sit down with them, get to know them, like create like an air of distraction in a way to try to diffuse the chaos that this person could be creating. I mean, I think Nicole would agree that when you can maintain calm in a very difficult time, it's really going to help bring that temperature down and keep the environment as quiet and as peaceful as possible. I think also if you as a care team are not successful in doing these things, that's when you call someone like Nicole, who's a professional, a death doula, who can come in as a consultant. Obviously, you want to talk to the family, say, I'd like to introduce this person who I believe would help create this set and setting that your family member or your loved one wished to have, and try to, again, diffuse the situation with a professional that knows how to approach. And there have been times I know my care managers have literally taken that disruptive family member out of the home, gone for a walk, had them sign some paperwork, look through things, like whatever it takes. It's kind of like when you have a child whose behavior is acting up, you need to provide them with distraction. So if you can remove them from that situation and kind of calm the scenario back down and really creating that leadership presence versus infusing yourself into the chaos.
Nicole, what are you seeing with like the kind of family dynamics in your world?
I would like to be more proactive. I understand that death and fear and all that creates a lot of reactiveness, right? When I come in, and hopefully I'm brought in early enough to be able to put out a plan that can be followed, but the plan is signage on the door about what the rules are. So we would create rules with the client to say, what do you want this dying experience to be? And we would say, these are the 10 things that Bob would like. And I'd like for each person that comes into this room to honor them. So really important predetermined sets of rules. Yes, the calming environment should be pre-discussed. Again, 90% of us know that we're dying, and therefore, hopefully, we'll have some opportunity to plan this. And so I love the creating of a calm environment. The other thing that's coming to my mind are two things. One is I love families to be involved, including children. I think it's really important because that first death experience often dictates how we feel about death in our lifetime and how it resonates on our bodies. And so anything we can do to teach about death at the appropriate age level, I think is really important. For example, one thing that I love is to create, maybe in a separate room, we've done cardboard coffins where we do art projects on that coffin and we decorate. We put things like flowers or our favorite necklace or, beaded bracelet that I made for grandma to really give everybody an opportunity to participate in creating something beautiful. And that's what we would transfer grandma in after grandma passes. So I just love the creativity part of it.
When you said involve children, my immediate knee-jerk reaction inside my bones was don't do that. Which I think just speaks to no matter how much we try to escape this piece of us, we are programmed to run from death and dying.
So share with me what came up for you.
All right, death doula. It was just immediate no. So I've got an 18-month-old, and I think the foundational belief that I have in my bones is that death is danger, and it's the kind of thing that you would be putting them at risk to have them experience and be alongside of and be a part of. And I think it's this it's going to get on them or it's going to infect them. It's totally an irrational fear.
Right.
But I wanted to just call out, because I bet people listening to heard you say that and they were like, what in the world is this lady talking about? But I think what do you hope to be the outcome, or what do you hear from families who have kiddos involved in this process with a grandparent or whatever the case may be?
Yeah, Gabby, did you want to say something before I responded?
Yeah, a personal anecdote. So my husband's grandparents, he had 3 of them living here in San Diego, and my daughter is now almost 10. But over the first 7 years of her life, she was involved in those 3 great-grandparents. She was able to be at their bedside within 12 hours of their death. So she sang, held hands. One of my grandmother's-in-law's favorite songs was just a typical nursery rhyme song that she and Audie would sing together. And so we would sing that. We did lean into exposing our daughter because these people were part of her life. She has learned at this young age what a beautiful, calm death looks like of a loved one in their own bed, a bed that she got to snuggle next to them in their final moments. I hope, that was completely new experience for me.
Yeah.
I'd never seen death until I got into the home care field. I certainly had never seen death of a loved one.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I was like, is this really something that we should be doing as parents? But it absolutely was. And I feel like she's developed this solid foundation of what a good death really looks like for a loved one.
First of all, I love that as you're saying that, man, what a meaningful way to get closure, because I think so often you don't get to see the end, and so you're left to kind of wonder of all the different ways that it would fractal. On the other hand, I'm like, Gabby, is your child not just Wednesday Addams, just walking around as morbid as can be?
Or she hates scary things. She won't go in haunted houses, because that is not a true picture, I think, of what death looks like for her or what dying is. All of her grandparents died peacefully over the age of 90, two of them at 98. She sees that it's going to sleep and it's not waking up, and it's being surrounded by loved ones in a non-scary way.
Well, Nicole, I totally derailed us. And of course, now we're back to not talking about clients' family, or we're not talking about clients. No. We're talking about me again, which is apparently what I do.
No, and David, what you said, and gosh, I need to remember for myself, some of the stuff has become so normalized for me. I apologize for just skipping over that. And so I'm so glad that you brought that up. It is a very common issue, concern, fear that I try to work through with my clients, and it doesn't always work. Some still were absolutely not. And you've got to honor, but I do encourage it.
Sure.
And to Gabby's point, bringing music and art and things like that into it is just so beautiful. One of my very first clients I supported, funny, I met him off next door. He was leaving an 8-year-old daughter, and it was really a struggle for him. So we ended up going to the library together and getting some books. And that was his introduction into cancer first, and then to death. And there are some beautiful books that we can utilize. I can't think of the names of any of them, but just really take that time and know that this imprint is going to matter for the rest of their life. It really is. And I would say, Gabby, your story in supporting people in their 90s and grandparents, that is much easier. When I think of this first client who's leaving his 8-year-old daughter behind, that is a completely different experience. So I'm not saying some are easy and hard or whatever it is, but we can't lie to them. And that's what I see often is that grandma went away or so-and-so is just gone vacation or something. And to me, that just eats me up inside because that lasting impact, I think, is so great because then we learn to just trust the people that we're leaning on. What I was going to as a next is there's something, and I read this in one of my early books, was about having a chair outside of the room. And if I felt a family member needed some one-on-one time, I could take them and ask them if they'd like to sit in that chair, and I could sit with them, and we could really, again, it's the compassionate inquiry, the Gabber which is like, tell me what's coming up for you. The root of all of this is going to be fear. And so how do we really, to your point, David, that fear it might be irrational in your ego mind, but in your subconscious, it's not. And so how do we start getting down to the real root of what's causing this, and how do we work through that and maybe do some breathing exercises, whatever the support is that I would customize for that person, and then ask them when they're ready to come back in. Those are just some techniques that I've found to be really helpful. But bringing a doula in that is really comfortable with the holding of space and redirecting and keeping people focused on a goal that is so sacred is just a gift that I think is so important for people to give to themselves and their families.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about like the language that we use to talk about when somebody dies, which is they passed away or they went to be with Jesus, and all of these are like very like nice kind of like euphemistic ways to talk about death. And I think one of the things that's a challenge is there's a loss of clarity. And this is the case with kids and stuff. They don't understand what has happened because we're not clear with them. But I think it's a problem for anybody. Like we've got to be very clear about what's happened. So if you had to say, here's how everybody should explain what has happened after somebody has died, what would that script sound like? Because I think there's a lot of variations of this that are unhelpful.
I think it's really important to use the death word. If you attend any of my events, you'll hear me use the death word over and over. The death aversion is the root of our issues around this topic. And so I don't like to pussyfoot around it. I really want to get to the root of it and say what it is. Now, we all probably have different spiritual beliefs on what happens after death.
Sure.
And I'm going to honor that for each of us. And I'm not here to impose my belief on what happens with our soul and things like that. But I do think using the word death is important. And, what comes to mind is pets. With younger kids, we'll say, oh, they ran away, something like that.
In my world, we say they went to a farm.
Or doggy heaven.
Doggy heaven.
I think every death is an opportunity for us to educate our loved ones on what is really happening to the physical body. And asking them, what do you believe happens when when this vessel dies? Our heart is no longer beating. What do you think? And give them an opportunity to start exploring the meaning of life and death for themselves.
That's really beautiful. I think in the context of home care agencies, we often don't have that opportunity to deep dive after postmortem. But we do have a responsibility and an opportunity leading up to the death, especially when we know our client has a diagnosis or is in the end of life stage. There's a lot of words in our industry that people avoid. People avoid hospice. People avoid end of life. And I firmly believe that if you are a home care agency that wants to be a leader in your market and in your community, you have to be really comfortable using the right language. So I'm really glad that you bring this up. And how you navigate through that is going to be different for every client situation. But there certainly are cues that you can lean into, whether that's during the assessment process, whether that's reporting from your caregiver. But maybe when a client is really slowing down with their own natural process of eating, or they're just really tired, or their breathing is becoming more labored. You as an agency need to be educated on what those signs look for, and then comfortable bringing up these questions to the family from a professional perspective to ensure that they're going to get the right support that they need and they have a really beautiful death experience versus a very tumultuous, chaotic, in denial, fearful. That could look like, again, it comes down to education and it comes down to leadership, asking your team, how well do you know actually about hospice and end of life? Do you know what the physical and mental cues are when someone is starting to move into that stage of actively dying? These are not things that you learn until you've either been curious or you've had the experience. And so I would just encourage home care companies. Like I said in our last episode, a lot of people get business with and partner with hospice agencies. But how are you really leveraging those professionals to educate you and your staff and pick up on the cues and then use the language and talk about death and dying and end of life and the symptoms and the process that is coming? And it's common for everyone. Everybody, right, Nicole, pretty much goes through a similar process. There are similar cues that we can pick up on. Before I was in home care, I didn't know that there was this death rattle sound that our throats, or I don't know what that goes through. But then you start picking up on the caregiver said the client is like having trouble swallowing and sounds like mucusy. And it's like, bing, that's a cue. That's a sign. Okay, now how are we communicating that back to the family if they're not there in the home? Maybe the daughter lives in a different state. So I just think that we have to really pay attention and understand the cues and then use the right language around them.
And a lot of people will ask, well, how much longer do you think they're going to live? And I just say, be really careful. I would say, just to respond to Gabby, which I'm in complete agreement, is it could be a sign that they're dying. This could be part of an active dying process. It looks like it. But be really careful because, somebody could rebound and live another year. So it's mind-boggling what people are capable of doing.
Yeah. The last thing I want to ask before we move on to talking about how we serve our clients in this part of their journey, Gabby, what typically happens after a client passes away and what the kind of follow-up is from, most home care agencies that you're aware of with respect to the family members, and then kind of think a little bit about what maybe that should look like. And I think sometimes the best marketing tools are like genuine human things to do. And I think there's an opportunity for this to align and be something that you do because it's the right thing to do. But like obviously also has the impact of like, if people are going to do word of mouth referrals, they're going to go, oh man, what they did after mom died was this, this, and this, and it meant so much to us and whatever. So anyways, talk a little bit about what you typically see and what you think maybe the opportunity is there.
Yeah, I think the opportunity is to really get clear on what that family wants, right? I think especially when you're a home care agency and you have these phenomenal caregivers who pride themselves on being comfortable, loving to work with hospice clients, are comfortable with the end of life process. But I think it's so important to pause and make sure that it's not a one size fits all, right? It's not like making a meal or helping somebody with a shower. This is a super sensitive, there's so many things that you have to take into account. Their ethics, their religion, their culture. I would say first and foremost is making sure that that caregiver is really clear on not coming in with any preconceived notions, any biases, and is able to ask questions, appropriate, sensitive questions to the family on what they need, and that they're there just to provide support and what they need. And then if they uncover that they don't know what they need, then the caregiver needs to communicate that back to the hospice team or the doula or the care manager to say, I don't want to be guiding this client because I know what I know. I'm here to support, like as the professional, let's wrap our arms around them and help them figure out what they need. I mean, a lot of people don't have a ritual or they don't have a religion. And so when the body is left, we may not know what to do. And so if a caregiver is coming in and saying, all right, last time this happened, this is what I did and this is how we did it. And that could just be very uncomfortable for the family. So we have to make sure that we're always asking, what are the preferences here? What can I do to support you? I'm here and I'm here to serve.
I have a checklist that I do with the patient and the client in advance, and especially around ceremony and ritual and honoring the body after. Are we going to bathe the body? Am I going to do a dying meditation? Are we going to use some sound bowls? I mean, there's so many great things. And I find even if they don't have a spiritual belief, a lot of times they'll still welcome a prayer, which I'm happy to lead, as well as, some type of ceremony, especially since so many people are choosing direct cremation, meaning that they're not getting together. People are coming in for the death and then the family's not gathering again. So if we identify, and this, I would say, if people can really hear this, if we can hold a vigil during the dying process while everyone is present rather than avoiding it altogether, people are going to be able to grieve that death much better and have a much better experience, because direct cremation means that once that body gets taken out of wherever they died, then they will not gather again formally and honor that person. So it just goes direct to the morgue, direct to cremation, and then they get the ashes. And maybe some point they might do a spreading of the ashes or something, but often in a very small, intimate setting, not with a larger gathering. So if we identify a direct cremation as what they're choosing and they're not going to be gathering, and you identify that family is present, really recommending some type of vigil. And it can be very informal in the house. I love that part of what I get to do. And we get to sit down and create what that looks like. Sometimes if the patient has capacity, they can be part of it. If they no longer, then the family. The other thing I was thinking about, and kind of this checklist and things that I do, especially with even a remote family, we'll go on a daily Zoom. And a lot of people just need something to do to feel that they're participating. And so we might have one person going and researching whole body donation, because that's something that, we need to confirm that we're still on track to do, because that's what the patient wanted. If we are going to have a funeral, like, let's go research the florist or the food. Let's start doing some of that in advance and prepping and planning and having these conversations. I have a whole spreadsheet and we go through it daily. We prioritize it. And I will tell you, when people feel like they're contributing to the process, they find so much joy in it.
What about even doing an exercise like, let's write, a story. Let's maybe one person is dedicated to writing the actual obituary that goes in the newspaper. But what if you could create an intentional activity around writing down some of the favorite things about that loved one, or things that you hope to remember about them 20, 30 years from now? How are you going to memorialize them in your own life? Again, it's a mode of taking the fear and the anxiety out and putting all of that into a place that's a bit more constructive. And
then I'll have one client that'll say, they're not even dead yet. Why would you want to even ask about their obituary, right? So I have to be so sensitive to understand how much pre-work they want to do or don't do. It is just something we have to be really careful and really ask the right questions before you start making recommendations.
Exactly. And that's the same approach with home care agencies. And I think that it's really important not to just come in with a one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah. This is where me as professional talk person at sales and stuff can contribute a little bit, which is I think there's a lot of power in giving people orienting kind of road signs for where they might like to go. And so the kinds of things that we might say, instead of, hey, when we have this, then we do this. It's hard to talk about this with family. I'm not sure if you're experiencing that, but if there's anybody that, you might be worried about having this conversation with once so-and-so passes away, we've got some resources, some handouts that might be helpful. And they might say, nope, we're good. Or they might say, oh my gosh, that would actually be amazing. And it's a way to offer those kinds of things. Like a caregiver could say, one of the things I love to do when a family is experiencing the loss of a loved one is to make a meal. Would that be helpful for you guys? And that's a way, if the answer is no, and that the answer is no for a lot of people, right? I don't eat other people's cooking. That's fine. But it gives us the opportunity to make those kinds of offers and give people some structure if they don't already have some, and so many people don't. But we're not imposing upon them Nicole, you're not coming in and saying, all right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get the spreadsheet out and we're going to write the obituary and we're going to do a daily Zoom call. And if you're not on the daily Zoom call, we're going to tell somebody that you weren't on the daily. You are every single death is unique and the people involved are unique. And so I think it's so important to be able to have some structure that we know is helpful to lots of people, but not hold so tightly to it that we're rigid about implementing some kind of process because we would have got to make an SOP out of death.
Yeah. And it was one of the biggest lessons for me very early on when I started my practice, was thinking that I needed to fix things. It's just a natural thing for many of us, especially women, mothers, caregivers. I had to really learn to listen. I do a lot through storytelling. I had a client and this family really welcomed this. How does that sit with you? Is that something that you guys want to learn a little bit more about?
Yeah, I love a to what extent question. I had a client who this was their situation. To what extent does that resonate with you guys? And they'll be able to say, exactly, that's what we want. Or they'll be able to say, yeah, it's close, but that's not but it gives them the ability to tell you where they are in relation to what you've told them. It's huge.
Just offering a little bit of direction in a sensitive way when one is feeling really overwhelmed, especially if they haven't had this experience before, can be so helpful.
It has to come with the question first, though. Would you like to hear something that's coming up for me that might support you with this? And they've got to answer yes. Otherwise, it's not going to be heard. And then I wanted to go back to something you asked earlier, something that I've really learned as I've gotten to be more knowledgeable on suicide. One of the teachers that I had, a rabbi actually, Dan Roberts, taught me very early on that when you're working with somebody who ended their life through suicide, we don't call it committing suicide. We call it ending their life with suicide, or a term like that. It's such a habit for me because I've said it my whole life. And so I just ask us to consider maybe choosing our words a little bit more wisely, because people that have lost loved ones through suicide could be very sensitive to that phrase.
I think we've spent probably 10 minutes of this episode talking about the language that we use when we talk about the thing. So much is symbolic, and the way that we communicate is through words, which are just symbols, but they say so much about what we really believe. And I think very active voice words like committed suicide has a whole spiritual moral baggage to it that is just, it doesn't help, right? You can believe what you believe, but when somebody has experienced that and had a loved one, my wife's from the social work world, and the language there was died by suicide. And that's much more morally neutral. It's not judgmental. And somebody may be listening to this and be like, my God, why are these people talking about the Oxford comma for 10 minutes of a death podcast? But I do think so much of what we feel and what we believe is borne out in the words that we use, but also is impacted so much by the words other people use to us when we're talking about the thing. It's an organic thing. None of us are perfect. Nicole, you talk about death all day, every day, and you don't have all the language exactly dialed in. Honestly, that's really important for people to hear, is I don't know what I'm doing here. None of us know what we're doing here, but we can just kind of try and figure it out the best we can and give people the space and the freedom to feel what they feel, instead of closing these doors and, like I said last time, holding all the emotion right here, and then one day I'll die. Okay, let's move on to talk about the client experience here. It's funny, we come to them last. They're always the last to be thought of. We're managing all the other stuff except for the client many times. But I think, one of the things, I'm happy that we spent a lot of time talking about the family, because I think one of the best ways that we can serve our clients is by preventing some of the chaos that can come in when a family member flies in out of nowhere and starts going through the drawers. If we can protect the environment, we've already done a whole lot to take care of the client. But I want to dig in a little bit more with the kinds of things that we can do in collaboration with the death doula or with hospice, or just as, our caregivers and our care managers in the home, to make the client experience something that's not just activities of daily living and doing the things required by the care plan, but really making somebody's final days meaningful and something to really be proud of, a good death.
I would just say the thing that I hear most is patients want agency. They want to remain in control of their death, just as they did their life.
Yeah.
And they're going to die the way they live in a lot of ways. And so we have to respect who they were in life and honor them in that way, So those are just some things that come to my mind. Obviously, having as much conversation around what they want and supporting that is key. But a lot of times I will tell you with patients, it's touch. A lot of them aren't getting enough touch. We'll talk about medical aid and dying, but almost every client I've ever sat with who's doing an ingestion, the first time when I walk in and I greet them, I'll say, would you like a neck massage? Would you like a shoulder massage? And they just go, yeah, excited. And often I touch through the point where they take their, they go into a coma, which is a few minutes after they take their ingestion. And a lot of times what I found is the family's not real comfortable touching their loved one. Maybe they weren't a touchy-feely family to begin with. And that person hasn't necessarily been massaged and touched for some time. And I just have found that that's my way of giving love and honoring. And it's just been really special.
Yeah, I think that's really beautiful. As you were saying that, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, like, we're physically repelled by people who are dying. And I think that's one of those like superstition, it's going to get on me kind of plague mentality nonsense that makes people, like, folks as they are aging are already very lonely. And I think literal like physical isolation, even when people are in the same room, is something that I'm happy to hear that you're breaking through.
I would add, from a home care agency perspective, it's all about alignment. And I think a lot of client experience, whether it's end of life or just in general, it comes from the agency's inside misalignment. And a lot of that starts with the business development or the salesperson or the care coordinator who's coming in and doing the assessment. And again, it's recognizing and not running away from the true reality of that person's situation, the client situation. And so we talk about care plans, we talk about goals of the client. What's the client's goal? And often it's in a context of someone getting better or being able to do something independently. But how can we transform those goals into what their end of life goals are?
Yeah.
And what types of practices, exercises, and questions are we asking in that initial day, week of onboarding and starting care with that client to make sure that we are touching on those goals throughout their experience? It could be, I haven't talked to my granddaughter in 3 years, and I would really like to say hello. But if that isn't even asked or uncovered, that person may never be able to live out that wish because they can't physically pick up the phone. They don't have the capacity to know how to dial. They don't know how to use FaceTime. And so how can we as an agency really ask, what are your goals in the next couple of days, weeks, months while we're caring for you, client? And then also ask that of the family, because sometimes our clients, they don't know how to answer that question, but that's okay. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be asked. So I think we have a real responsibility when we're coming in to pay attention. I mean, how many times has a home care team come in and spoken directly to the adult daughter, who we know is the one who's signing the paperwork, who's paying the bills, who's carrying the burden and the stress, and who's the one who called us? But yet mom is laying there in the bed and nobody is paying attention to her. It's uncomfortable, and it's really hard sometimes to figure out, how do you address someone who can't necessarily communicate back to you? But to Nicole's point, you can touch them. You can get close to them. Maybe they have macular degeneration. They can't see. Oh, mom can't see you. She doesn't know you're here. Well, let's lean into that and say, hi, Betty, I'm here. I'm Gabby. Let's not just ignore the person that's laying in the bed that we're here to care for, the client.
And this comes back to the good sales and marketing activity is the good sales and marketing activity because it's the human thing to do. And it's the thing that you're going to do as a home care agency that other people aren't, because we're all, nervous and scared to say the wrong thing and to get too close to people. And ultimately people make decisions based on who they trust. And I think they're going to trust the people who obviously care about mom.
And I would say that the providers, the death doula, the physician, the hospice team, they all want everybody's goal is really to help this client have the best experience they can in end of life. And how I've seen these amazing videos of a patient in a hospital bed being wheeled out onto the boardwalk so she can witness a sunset for the last time because her favorite thing in the world was witnessing sunsets. And she used to walk on the beach every evening to see a sunset. And so those are the goals that we can address and that we can show up and ensure that that client is really, people have bucket lists. How can you tick off maybe one or two last things on that client's bucket list? But if you're not asking, if you're just there to say, our caregivers will turn your mom every 2 hours, we'll look out for bed sores, all of those things are really important too.
Yeah.
But I think when you are dying, right, you have these moments of exertion, you see these common things where people are like reaching for something. They're in there and they want to maybe have those last experiences. They want to hear their favorite song. They want to touch a face. They want to feel your tears, whatever the thing. I'm getting a little out there, but I don't know. What do you think, Nicole? What would you add to that?
I just love everything that you're saying. I mean, this is truly a human experience, like David said. And, I've had one client that didn't want to be touched. She had a particular disease where touch was very painful for her. It's beautiful to really lean in and hopefully already had this pre-conversation, right? That's my whole thing. I guess if I can leave you with one message is bringing in the doula as early as possible to really be that quarterback, that event planner, to ask the right questions, use the right checklist, but also to support all of this can just be so helpful because there are generally times when they can't speak up, especially during the dying process, and you can continue to honor their wishes.
I'm going to ask the really dumb question, and then we're going to talk a little bit about medical aid in dying. Nicole, how often is it the case that home care agencies are bringing you in to their clients' homes?
Well, I've only been active for a year, and most of my business was with two particular end-of-life doctors that are doing the medical aid and dying ingestion work, and they're bringing me in to support the process. I would say the last 6 months, I've been doing much more work with educating, going in and speaking to hospice and home care, and I'm building those relationships. So yeah, that's an area that I'm still developing.
Good. Gabby, my instinct is, just from being around home care agencies, that very, very few of them have an established relationship with a death doula. How does that resonate with what you see in the world?
Absolutely. Like I said in our last podcast, I mean, many home care agencies have hospice relationships, but candidly, I didn't have a death doula relationship. I did have a relationship with a local physician group, Empowered Endings, here in San Diego, who really has pioneered medical aid in dying here in San Diego. My teams have always collaborated with Dr. Bob and his team to educate us, and then we've brought him into situations and we've collaborated on family and client situations. But no, and I think it's really not that hard, right? We all have the internet. We all can Google. We all can get a little bit more clear and get curious on, do these professionals exist in our market?
Yeah.
If they don't, could there be one another market that I could invite in via Zoom and educate my team? Something else too is networking. Nicole, her skill set is so unique. There's not many people like her in this very large, densely populated county of San Diego.
Yeah.
So after we met, I've invited Nicole to the networking group that I host on a monthly basis, which is a wide array of professionals that work with seniors, from realtors to hospice to senior living communities to financial planners to geriatric care managers. And now Nicole, she attended last month, and she's going to continue to attend and be a resource. And so we, as a home care professional or as a sales and business developer, have an opportunity to make sure that our community knows about people when we, like Nicole, when we find them.
Yeah.
Shouting her from the rooftop, getting her involved in more opportunities to do speaking and education, and then knowing the right time and place to introduce this service to families when it's appropriate. And I think that's a good question, Nicole. Like, obviously, we want to get you involved the earlier, the better. But we know in home care that often when we get a hospice referral, that client has probably got weeks to days sometimes. I would say on average, we're lucky if we have them for months or years on hospice service. So what would you, and now David, I'm flipping the script here. I'm asking the questions. What would you say would be like the right kind of time to think about introducing you to a client? Is it at that initial after that initial intake? We know that that client's got a terminal cancer diagnosis. They're on hospice. They're probably going to pass away. How do we introduce you?
It's interesting. What's coming to mind is it's never too early and it's never too late, right? I might come in for an hour and that's all I'm there and needed for, and that's okay. But I will tell you, my focus has been, and Empowered Endings was my initial partner that I worked and had a long-term relationship with. I helped them build their online comprehensive advanced planning platform, which I use heavily. One of the very first ways that I often get brought in, especially if somebody gets a new terminal diagnosis, I'd love to be there earlier, but let's just say that's the trigger for most people. because they keep putting planning off, thinking they're going to live forever, and they just don't want to deal with it. And they're not wanting to have that conversation until they have to. But let's say they get that diagnosis. This really transitions into our next conversation really well, because you need to have clear documentation in your advance plan, which includes your living will and your healthcare agent assignment, to be able to say, who do you want to speak for you if you cannot speak for yourself? And then second of all, what are your wishes? And a basic advance plan that we can all get for free online, which is wonderful, generally is not sufficient if you want agency and you want to be very clear on what your end of life is going to look like. If you don't care and you just want everybody else to take care of it, meaning the medical team and your loved ones, you should still have your healthcare agent assignment, but then you can just let whoever decide for you. That's not what most of my clients want. Most of my clients have a very specific set of definition that I walk them through in the comprehensive directive that says, these are my minimum life thresholds. I do not want to be kept alive artificially if, these things. And one of them that's coming up often is dementia. If my body is outliving my mind and I don't recognize my loved ones, I can't feed myself, I am fully bedridden, whatever the questions are that they deem or the criteria is, then we document it very, very clearly. So the question is, okay, now your minimum life hasn't been met. Your criteria is now here. Then what? And this is when we go into, how do we end our life? We can do it in a variety of ways. And one of them is the Dying with Dignity in California, medical aid in dying. But that's for a very select population, right? That's not widely available. Wonderful, grateful to have it. And yes, I work with Dr. Donnie Moore as a physician, end-of-life physician that brings me in as a doula to support his clients, and with Dr. Uslander at Empowered Endings. But there's several others. But the next thing is, if you don't qualify for that, then what? The highest suicide rate is white men over 65. How do they end their life? They use guns, right? They could OD on pills. They have a variety of ways to end their life. Generally, the people that are left behind as a result of that it's not a good experience, right? If you ask me what my motto, what my goal, my mission is, it's to give everybody a good death. So that doesn't really align with what I would like people to do. Again, I'm not here to judge. I'm here to hold space. But that's when voluntary stop eating and drinking is really available to everybody in every state. And all that really means is that you're refusing hydration and food. That is a natural way of our body shutting down. Our organs will shut down, usually between, I've seen 4 days to 2 weeks. Okay. So voluntary stop eating and drinking is something that is becoming more and more understood and supported, so that when people say, my life is complete when this criteria is met, or my suffering is too great. I work with another doctor, Dr. Stanley Turman up in the Bay Area, and he does it through, instead of minimum life threshold, he does it through defining levels of suffering between mild all the way to extreme. And he then uses voluntary stop eating and drinking to honor his patients to end their life. And sometimes also brings in moderate sedation. He calls it moderate anesthesia as part of that solution, because there are times when you're going through the early part of voluntary stop eating and drinking that we need to make sure that that person is comfortable. And in his work, he differentiates it by, are you able to continue to feed yourself or are you not? So if you can't feed yourself, we would still put food out 3 times a day for you. But let's say you have dementia and your brain doesn't resonate with that. And therefore, in your own life, based on the brain disease, the dementia, by not putting that food in your mouth. Okay? Wow. That's a very distinct definition for his work that I find interesting. And then the other is, if you do have the ability to feed yourself, especially in a dementia situation, then he uses for the first 4 days moderate anesthesia in order to keep that person asleep. And then there's a process after that. So my point is, it's a much better way, in my opinion, when supported by doulas, by healthcare professionals, palliative care, hospice. Everybody is involved in both of these end-of-life choices, by the way, all of these important team members. But I believe it's a much easier thing to hold space for and to honor, because the people left behind, you can still be bedside support, you can still be doing ritual and ceremony, and you can still be with your loved ones through the voluntary stop eating and drinking process. And by the way, we want 24/7 care, so we bring in caregivers a lot through that journey in order to support that. So I do the education and the planning up front. And so the very first way you can look at bringing me in is if you have somebody that is very clear that they want agency, they want to control their decision, they do not want to live when certain conditions are met, then a basic advance directive that we continue to hand out in our case managers and social workers is not sufficient for them. They need to have a voluntary stop eating and drinking advance directive, and they need to go through defining everything clearly so that it can be honored.
Last thing that I want to say before we get out of here, and then Nicole, I want you to give some resources, some ways if people are hearing this and are like, okay, I'm interested. This is an area that we haven't been providing nearly enough resources. I want you to think about the ways that you'd want them to take action. But I had Guy Tomasi on a few weeks ago, and one of the questions I asked him, and this is always the discharge planner challenge, is the discharge planner will say, I don't have anybody who can afford home care. And so I posed that question to him because it's a really common objection that people get when they go to talk to that referral source. Nobody has money for caregivers, for private caregivers. And he said to that hypothetical discharge planner, he said, that is not your decision to make. You are not the one who decides what people will and will not pay for. You don't know what resources they have. You have to give them these options. And so I think when we were talking about making the referral to Nicole, you as a death doula or another death doula, the immediate thing that came up in my brain was, well, we're already nervous about folks paying for our services. What if this sounds like we're trying to upsell them or nickel and dime them or whatever? And my immediate thought was harkening back to what Guy said of that is not your decision to make. You don't know what people will pay for. You don't know what resources people have. I mean, obviously in home care, we know more than the discharge planners. The hospital likely does, but like, you don't know who's going to hear that and say, oh my God, we've been looking for that exact thing. So I think what I've taken away from this episode is, Nicole, not enough home care agencies are aware of the services that you provide and that death doulas more generally provide, and more people need to have this as a tool in their toolkit, or else we are doing some of our clients and some of their families a real disservice by not connecting them with the resources that they need. So anyways, yeah. Nicole, if somebody hears this and they're like, oh my God, we've got to connect with Nicole. We've got to hear more about what she's doing. There's a lot of resources, it sounds like, that you have. What's the best way for people to learn more about what you're doing and access some of those resources like the Advanced Care Directive that actually holds some water?
To respond to your point about value and paying for the services, my thought is, one, the grief and the long-term impact of not getting the support when you need it is really, really expensive and difficult for most people. And so I would say, then what? If you don't, then what, right? And then I would also say that a lot of people, by choosing to keep agency in their life, often are not then going into dementia memory care facility that the family is then having to pay $165,000 a year for in California. So a lot of times when you really get educated and look at the whole picture, there's a lot of savings in bringing a doula in early. So I have a comprehensive advance plan for an individual and a couple, and that is a lot of how I generate my revenue today. And so just reaching out to me, and I'm happy to do like a 15-minute free consultation just to see what are your goals and is this the right thing for you, or is a basic advance plan. I probably once a month, I am a volunteer through Compassion Choices, and I do my own workshops. I just had one last week up in Encinitas, and I'm going to start doing some more via Zoom. So I do a lot of free basic advance directive teaching, and that could be sufficient as well. And so my goal is to make things very affordable and available, and then I just encourage people to upgrade to a paid service if they feel that's right for them. And the key there is it's a guided. So a lot of people, when you're filling out an advance directive, it's a very medical set of questions. Do you want CPR? Do you want permanent tubes, et cetera? And so really looking at what does that mean? What are the statistics around it? Those are the things that I can really help with as a professional guide.
I was just going to add that website, compassionandchoices.org, is such a valuable place to gather information, to get resources, to attend events. So I'm glad that you mentioned, I think that's the same organization. I think it's mostly for California.
Nationwide. Yep.
Perfect. Yeah. So it's compassionandchoices.org is a great resource.
Okay.
And then I just wanted to just highlight, like, Guy is so right. I mean, I face this objection from discharge planners all the time, being in business development for private pay home care for many, many years. It is not their place to judge someone by their insurance or what they see when they're in the acute care setting. It's amazing how much people do have saved when they look like they may not. And it's not the social worker's place to say whether or not that person can afford home care. I would always object and say, that is my lane. Let me have that difficult discussion around finances with the family and the client. Please encourage them to call me so I can suss that out. And really, if we're not the right fit, I have other resource that may be less expensive for them. So yes, do not let that be an objection that stops you from being connected to families.
Well, before we get out of here, Gabby, I saw a cool new logo on your email signature. So thanks for coming around just to like lend some really valuable wisdom to the show today. But I want you to say just a little bit about what you're up to now and how people can reach out if they're interested.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I haven't officially put it out there to the world, but I have started my own home care business development consulting company. After almost 20 years in this space, I'm finding a lot of joy helping other agencies really get strategic and focus on how to grow their private pay, how to overcome very typical objections like this. I'm here as a coach and a resource and a guide for home care agencies nationwide when they want to learn from me how to grow their business in terms and be more impactful and bring value. I mean, I mentioned a couple of things. One, this networking group that I host. I love this group. It's a way for me to stay relevant in my community and continue to bring professionals together. And like I said, it's to see how all these different trusted advisors, healthcare providers, we all have a place at the table. And when we work better together, we're able to make a better impact in the community. So my company's called Trail Angel Partners. So check me out on LinkedIn. I'll have a website one of these days. But right now, I'm just enjoying the work that I get to do with my clients.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. I love this conversation. If you got a lot out of this, like and subscribe. But also reach out to Gabby, reach out to Nicole. And we'll link some resources below in the show notes. And so you can take action there. Thanks, guys, so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.
On behalf of the team here at Zengage, thanks for listening to the show. We'll be back next week with another episode. So be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts on Spotify or Apple or YouTube. Leave us a rating while you're there. It helps other people find the show. If you have comments on the show, drop me a line, david@zengage.com. Would love to hear from you, chat with you there.